Yo, it's Mike, and this is about as camera as a camera can get. It's quintessential. It's the Pentax K1000. Let's talk about it. The K1000 is a hugely successful camera in any regard. It was in production for 21 years, it sold 3 million units, and everyone still loves them today. To give a sense for the scope of its history, the camera was first put into production in 1976, the first year that commercial Concorde flights took off, and production ended in 1997, the year Princess Diana died. We talk a lot about keeping film alive nowadays, but the K1000 never really went through a life and death cycle. Even when it was out of production, it was still a fan favorite. It's one of very few cameras that has that claim to success, and in its own ways, the K1000 keeps film photography alive in the same way we're trying to. It plays one particular contemporary role incredibly well. It's almost everyone's first camera. Anytime someone asks, I want to get into film, what camera do I go with? The answer is almost always the K1000. Why? Because it's cheap, it is very difficult to break, and it forces you to learn exposure. It's simple, reliable, and it has a heap of great lenses. It's aged gracefully. The design isn't particularly striking in any way, but it's sort of what we think of when we think film camera. It's everything you need and nothing more. From the mid-70s to the mid-80s, there were new, very competitive production trends amongst the big SLR manufacturers. They were trying to shrink their cameras down into smaller packages. They were loading them up with electronics because, of course, it's the 70s and 80s. And yet, amongst all these new pressures, there was one camera that stood resolute in its all-mechanical, all-manual composure, the K1000. This camera shouldn't have made it. No one needed a camera as old school as the K1000 when other cameras were offering auto exposure, electronically controlled shutters, and yet the K1000's lack of features became a feature in and of itself. It was a simple camera that would shoot roll after roll and never quit. It was a reliable camera at a very competitive price. For context, the Canon AE1 with 50mm lens sold for $630 back in 1976. That is the equivalent of 2,700 of today's dollars. Whereas the Pentax K1000 with 50mm lens sold for $220 in 1976, the equivalent of 940 of today's dollars. So what does the K1000 offer? You have shutter speeds from a second to 1,000th of a second, you have a standard focusing screen, you have a decent built-in meter that's really simple to understand, and you have light seals that are super simple to replace. But none of that is important. The K1000 offers anyone the chance to try film, and any camera that has that potential is good in my books. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. See you all in the next one. Good luck and good light. That's a wrap, boy!